Hello, and welcome to Addressing Record-Breaking Cyber Attacks in Education. I'm Sherilyn Hill, and I'm part of the marketing team here at Entangle. However, leading our webinar today is Heather Pawnay, Senior Vice President of Product and Marketing. And I'll pass the mic over to Heather in just a second, but first, a couple of the housekeeping items. To get the best view, choose the highest screen resolution via the gear icon. The slide shows where you can find that in the bottom right of your viewer. Second, if you have questions, go ahead and include them in the chat box. We really try to answer those during the webinar, but if for some reason we can't, we will have someone follow up with you directly with that. And lastly, if you need to leave the webinar or catch up later, all of our webinars are available on demand so you can watch at your convenience. And now, over to Heather.
Great, thank you, Sherilyn. So yes, I'm Heather Pawnay, and I'm part of the product and marketing team at Entangle. Thank you for joining us to listen about the challenges that we're seeing with regards to network security, specifically in education. Some of the challenges, and we'll also talk about some of the best practices on how to guard against them. At Entangle, we're constantly looking at ways to provide protection, which leads us to constantly evaluate our solution, what's changed in the last few years, where are attacks commonly occurring, do we need to update our technology? And we spend a lot of time looking at what the most common attacks are going on at the moment and trending, what kinds of industries are getting attacked the most. And this is where I have been absolutely shocked at just the amount of money that's been paid in ransomware and how much disruption has been caused to students and educational institutions in general due to cyber attacks. And 2020 was a particularly bad year. So let's start off with looking at some of the challenges in education. When we think about the network or the internet in general that students have access to, it's not just about keeping the network up and running and stopping cyber attacks. It is first and foremost about the students themselves. When teachers and parents could physically see who their kids were hanging out with, it was relatively easy to spot behavior that did not look right with each particular child. But today, though, at break times, where students will be on their phones or tablets, it's just not possible to look over the shoulder all the time. And so you don't know who is trying to talk to them. Is anyone trying to persuade them to do something? And what are they following on YouTube that might be influencing them? In essence, are they safe with what they're doing online? And as students click around on links, it's really easy to go from page to page and video to video as they go through YouTube and various different websites. And they're receiving messages on all sorts of chat apps. But what happens if they click on a dangerous one? Ransomware can really easily start with an email message, clicking on something that looks like something a student would be curious about, but it actually kicks off an executable file. Now, put that device that they're using on the school network, and it can spread from the device onto the network, cripple the network, or lock everything up with those high ransom demands. Now, it's not just about keeping students safe and the network up and running, though. With so many distractions like that, there's things that can get the students in trouble for their own personal safety and for the security of the school network as well. But it's also about so many distractions, distracting them from focusing on their studies. So, for example, my son has been doing his studies remotely for a while, and now he's still doing them once a week remotely as schools start to open up. And I personally found my own 13-year-old son a few weeks ago with his school iPad on the right and his personal iPad on the left running Minecraft. To the teacher, he was doing everything that she thought he should, but he was getting distracted, as he often would when doing his homework during study time. So finding ways to provide a network that enables students to focus on their study is key to ensuring the students get good grades. So according to the K-12 Security Information Exchange and the K-12 Cybersecurity Resource Center, cyber attacks on educational institutions surged by a whopping 18% in 2020. This will definitely be due to a greater student use of classroom technology during the pandemic. What would have been a class with students with books and a teacher suddenly turned into every student accessing school resources from home on their home network and connecting up to those school resources. But the centre also reported that there were 408 publicly disclosed attacks last calendar year, which is a significant increase since 2019. And that essentially amounts to more than 2 attacks per school per day. It's also the highest number of attacks since the centre first began tracking those incidents back in 2016. So 2020 was really a huge year for an increase in cyber attacks and the ransoms being paid. A couple of really impactful examples of that. So, for example, the University of California in San Francisco, so I'm based in San Jose, that's close to where I am. Back in June of 2020, they paid a ransom of $1.4 million after a group of data hackers, these were known as the Netwalker attackers, they encrypted academic files in a whole string of attacks. Now, the university was able to negotiate the ransom down from $3 million, and they were trying to negotiate by explaining the impact that it would have on the university school year. But $1.14 million is absolutely huge for an educational institution to pay. The other example is Baltimore County Public Schools in Maryland. That was in November of 2020, and that ended up having the school having to close for 115,000 students as a ransomware attack hit all the network systems, including the website, the email system, the grading system as well. So the school had to move to Twitter to inform its community about the attack. And it took a couple of weeks before they could restore that and get the students back on campus. So there are monetary effects, which are huge, but the number of students that can no longer attend their classes can be a huge impact as well. So before sending all kids home to connect from their home networks in 2020, the transition for student learning was already happening even before the pandemic. I would say 2020 expedited that to some levels that will remain even after students return. But carrying heavy books in backpacks is really not as necessary now. Many schools give their kids iPads on which they can access reading books, and technology such as RazKids for reading or Mathletics and Lexia Math, they provide all the information, all the learning materials and all the homework questions needed so that carrying those books around is no longer needed quite as much. Now, kids accessing on all these resources, they'll be doing so on school devices at school, but they're also doing some of this on their own iPads or on their family's home laptops as well. And all of this digital surface adds actually an attack surface of the home network, which is likely to be not as well protected as the school network. And this also gives the opportunity for something from the home network to get onto the device, which the students may later bring into the school, affecting the school network. So why have schools been in the news so much throughout 2020 and even before that as well? Well, schools are often considered soft targets, which means many of them don't have the necessary resources or the capabilities to protect their systems. And that can be due to budgets, in some cases not feeling that a school would be attacked. I think that's changing though, for sure, now that we've seen attacks on educational institutions hit the news so much. Now, schools also manage a lot of money with many attack surfaces, There are attack surfaces across facility management, transportation services, the technology that gives the curriculum, and food surface technologies as well, and even telecommunications as well. These are all different attack services that are exposed in there. And now also schools store and collect a lot of personal data about students and indeed about the families of the students as well. You've got all the parents' phone numbers and names and addresses, and sometimes payment systems are hooked up for the parents' credit card. So there's a lot of personal data about students there. But when thinking about student data, especially older students, this is data about people that hasn't yet reached other outlets. So students are the people that are coming into the consumer world. So their data has not yet reached places like credit bureaus. And so student information, especially for the older children, can be a source of new sellable data potentially on the dark web. So some of the things that can protect students when they're accessing the internet are, well, web filtering, keeping an eye on what students are looking at, what sites they are going to. Web filter can protect against things that they could come across when browsing the web that can cause damage to devices or infiltrate the network. And web filter can also block inappropriate sites and ensure that only age appropriate or study time appropriate web pages are available at any given time. Now, one good way to keep kids safe is to keep an eye on what they are searching for. So this doesn't necessarily mean that you have to have something that can go in and spy on or check up on students, but more that it's something that you can set up to flag anything that should cause an adult to intervene. So, for example, if there are certain kids that are searching for the term bullying, how to stop a bully, or depression or depressed or something like that, then intervention may be appropriate at that point. But for the vast majority of stuff, you don't want to be looking at everything that they searched for. You want to be able to set some flags on particular alarm points that require that adult intervention. Social media monitoring. At school, perhaps all social media should be blocked, or perhaps it should only be allowed at lunchtime. But getting a handle on that and putting some rules around usage of social media during the daytime for students, during study time, during homework periods, will really get the kids focused on what they should be doing. And then, of course, malware detection. So when kids are browsing around, clicking around, they can end up in all sorts of web pages so that something could be pulled onto their device and then it could get onto their school network. So there's keeping the students safe, and then there's the concept of keeping the school network safe. So some of the things that ensure that the school network is safe is, well, ensuring that malware can't get onto the student devices or the school network in the first place. Captive portal is a way to ensure that any device that joins the school network is known about. So as a new device joins the school network, there's a screen that pops up asking for the student name and password. And then once it joins the network, if needed, it can be tracked and it's known that it's actually a student that is using it. And that also helps with being able to put various different types of policies in place as well. For example, you might want to put different policies in place for students from grades 5 through 8 versus students who are older than that or younger than that. Threat prevention is a way of protecting the school network from any type of non-trusted or suspicious kind of incoming connection that can potentially get onto the network. Threat prevention is an excellent tool for security because it can scan even encrypted network traffic. Most of the traffic going across the internet today is encrypted SSL traffic. It's encrypted, and as it passes through various network security devices, often the only thing that can be seen to identify that network traffic is an IP address and perhaps a port number as well. Now, with threat prevention, even if all that's available is an IP address or that port number, threat prevention can look that up lightning fast as it comes through and figure out if it's associated with any type of high-risk activity, any kind of server, or anything that might cause harm to the device or the network. And if it's high risk, it can be stopped before it can even get onto the network and dropped. So when thinking about the students clicking around on those various web pages, it's one thing to use web filter there, but it's another thing to use threat prevention as well for that multi-layered protection. Block it in as many places as possible, and if it gets through, there's another layer that will pick it up. So now let's look at Untangle's next generation firewall, which includes all sorts of bits and pieces that can protect the network, keep the students productive, and provide network connectivity in all sorts of ways as well. So Untangle NG Firewall provides the ability to protect both the students and the school network as well. And examples of this are, it has web filtering, it has web monitoring, it has virus detection, which can keep malware off the internet. So that's a further layer, as well as the web filtering and the threat prevention, add the virus blocker in there as well. So layering up those protections, layering up those walls. So if one wall is knocked down, there's another one to pick it up. So this can all stop the type of malware that gets seen on the browsers of students so that they don't even get the chance to see it and click on it in their emails or when browsing web pages. Application control, this is a productivity feature which will provide the ability for the school body to put control around activities such as gaming or using social networking during study time hours. And with Untangle's NG Firewall, you can set up different policies for different grades, so different age ranges. You can set up different policies for teachers versus students versus faculty staff, for example. So some things that may not be appropriate for kids, they may be allowed for teachers or other types of staff. Now, policies can be set up to be there for devices on the network, or they can be set up for individuals on the network or groups of individuals on the network. So, for example, you might have a policy for grades kindergarten through 4th grade. That's age 12-ish for those who aren't in the US. And you can have a different policy for grades 5 through 8, or that's ages 13 through 15 for those not in the US. And then teachers can have another different policy again. And you can also set up a policy so that certain things are allowed only on school iPads, for example, and wouldn't be allowed on personal devices that are not official school devices. And then with Untangle, there are a ton of reports for all sorts of detailed activities, such as applications being used, web pages being visited, gaming activities, streaming activities. There are a lot of reports with Untangle's NG Firewall. You can see how much bandwidth was used, what applications were causing that much bandwidth usage, how much time students and teachers are spending online, and what types of things that they're doing there. So we'll have a look at some of those features at a high level. So starting with web filter. Web filter essentially looks at all web browsing activity on the network, and it can provide visibility into that, and it can provide controls onto that as well. And it can restrict access to certain types of websites. So all gaming websites, for example, or all social media websites during study time periods. Now, Untangle uses Webroot for their expertise in web filtering. And with that, we have the ability to categorize over 32 billion websites, and they get categorized into 80 categories. So using web filter, with that categorization, you can then block certain sites, certain types of sites, and put some controls over that. Now, Web Filter also has the ability to turn on some student-specific controls as students browse the web. So, for example, enforcing safe search or forcing all searches from Google, for example, to go through a kids-friendly search engine. So, Kids Search is a service provided by Google. It's a search engine specifically designed for children in a school environment. So instead of going to Google, where you can do a video or an image search where you could get a lot of adult content, this search filters all the search results so that they're specifically for a young audience. So if a student or a child does do a search in Google or Bing or anything outside the context of Kids Search, we can force it to go through Kids Search, and then they won't be able to bypass it. And to turn that on, it's essentially a checkbox, and it does require SSL Inspector, which is an option on Untangle to inspect all encrypted traffic. So application control, this uses technology that recognizes all the applications that are being used over the internet. And with application control, you can specifically block applications, or just like with web pages, you can restrict them to being able to be used only during certain times of the day. If a lot of bandwidth is being used up, then you can look into application control to find out what's happening on the network, which applications are using the most bandwidth, and put some controls on there. And you can get some productivity enhancements with application control. For example, you could put some restrictions on when media streaming can happen versus use of applications that are more appropriate for what should be used during class times. So, you know, RAS Kids, Mathletics and things like that are allowed, but perhaps YouTube and some gaming applications are not allowed. Other things, you can block Minecraft, for example, which would have solved my issue the other week that I mentioned. And you can block Discord, which is definitely used by a lot of teenagers for chattering to each other throughout the day. And with our next generation firewall, so we can recognize over 1,900 applications that you can put different types of controls on. And then you can then look at the application control to see what's going on, or you can put some controls around it for specific homework or study periods. So Policy Manager, for all the things that you can put controls on, it's the Policy Manager that really gets down into the details of setting up specific access policies and usage policies around different types of people or different types of devices. So, for example, you can put some specific policies for teachers, which are very different to students. You can set up policies based on the time of day that it is. So between the hours of 8 a.m. and 3 p.m., you can have certain types of policies in use. And then at the end of the school day, when you might have the children going into extended care, more into recreational activities, you can take that off and open up the network for more activities such as social networking and streaming of video that they may want to be doing while they're waiting for their parents to pick them up. And then threat prevention, I mentioned this a little bit before. So threat prevention is there to add a layer of security that may be, as well as using threat prevention and virus blocker and the other things that you can use to keep the network safe. So threat prevention analyzes web pages, web page associations, applications, files, and it essentially acts as a gatekeeper. It looks at the IP address of all of these services, and it determines as it looks at them whether they should be allowed on the network or not. So it will look at the IP address for every connection made through Untangle, and it uses the reputation of that IP address to determine whether the connection is allowed or not. And we do this at Untangle, again, using Webroot's Bright Cloud technology. So Bright Cloud have a whole networking system set up to look for botnets, Windows exploits, phishing, malware, and we run that through Bright Cloud Service in a similar way to how you would run a URL or a web page through Web Filter. And anything with a bad reputation score will be blocked. So if something is high risk, then it's probably been associated with some kind of malware or some kind of phishing, or it was used as a spam relay or as an anonymous proxy, or it had some association to something dangerous. So when you install threat prevention, the default is to block everything high risk and above. And that's a good starting point to use this feature from. You just don't want anyone connecting inbound or any outbound connections connecting to a host that has a high risk reputation. And as I mentioned before, threat prevention can work on encrypted traffic. It doesn't have to decrypt it first. It doesn't need SSL inspector to decrypt the traffic, look at it, and then encrypt it again afterwards. So there's no overhead and processing power on doing that. And it's also easier to use because you don't need SSL certificates to be deployed on all the client devices connecting to the network. So now I'm going to give a short demo just to make sure we cover a few of the things that I've gone over there. So let me switch to my demo. All right. Now, for those who haven't seen Untangle before, one of the things that's unique to Untangle is that we use the concept of apps. So similar to how you have all the apps on your Android phone or your iPhone, and we give our administrators the ability to only see the features that they care about. So if I go here, these are all the potential features and apps, as we call them, available that you can use on Untangle, in addition to the one I've already installed. So you can see some things here, like there's the SSL inspector that we look at. There's a spam blocker, web cache to speed up browsing. There's all sorts of VPN technologies that can be used there. But in the case of what I've got installed, these are the things that we're going to look at today and take a look at those. And you can see all the things that I'm not using aren't there. They don't clutter up my user interface. So it gets for a really clean user interface. It's really easy to find out what I want to be doing here by removing everything that's just unnecessary. So let's start off and take a quick look at Policy Manager. So I mentioned before that for Policy Manager, you can set up different policies for different people. So different grades, teachers versus the faculty, teachers versus students, and different student ages as well. So I've got a policy here which is for students grades 5 to 8, so that's children age 13 to about 16. And in this particular case, I care about web filter, I care about virus blocker, and application control. So everything else can go away there, because these are the things that I care about most. And then some of the policies that we could look at. So, for example, I have one here, which is setting up homework time for grades 5 through 8. And this is homework time for the schedule that we're currently using for May in 2021. So this is going to be a policy that adds some application control, some web browsing control every day that's a school day. So Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. It doesn't apply that on the weekend. And it does it from certain periods of the day. So homework time for our grades 5 through 8 is 3 p.m. till 5 p.m. And we find out who those students are because they're in a group called grades 5 to 8. So we know who they are. And then we've got a target policy. And I can set that, I'm going to set that to homework time. So during homework time, all of those students will get guided to that homework time policy. So we'll leave that there. And other different things that we can do there. So we can set up different policies, perhaps to only target school iPads. What are the things that should happen if our students are on their school iPads versus their personal devices? And we can use Policy Manager to choose devices. We can use Policy Manager to use time of day, and we can do it by individual students or classes of students as well. So I'm going to go back to the apps. I'll continue there and we'll have a look. Let me go into Web Filter. So for Web Filter, I've essentially got that enabled. So it's running and it's protecting my network. But here are all the different categories that I mentioned before. And I'm going to flip to my grades 5 through 8 policy here, because there's different things that matter for grades 5 through 8 that would matter for teachers and faculty members, for example. So when we're talking about students around the age of 13 to 15, we want to make sure that all of the security group is turned on. We don't want them clicking around as they go through different websites and video streaming, and they get links presented to them and click on them. We don't want that. So everything here is blocked in that category. And then the other thing that's important for kids of that age is absolutely everything in the sensitive category as well. So you can see that all of that is blocked, from inappropriate content to just things we don't want them looking up and getting exposed to at that young, tender age. So all of that is blocked as well. When I mentioned before that we can do such things as search terms, we can do that here. So I can add specific terms and I can say, I don't necessarily want it to block them searching for the term bullying, but I certainly want that to be flagged to me as an administrator. Student may be in trouble, and that, if I have that bullying there, then anytime a student searches for that term, and you can put some variants on that, like bully or how to stop a bully or something like that. I'll add a couple there. So anytime this happens, me as the administrator will get that flagged. I can see it, my attention is drawn to it, and I can decide if I want to put some intervention into that, have the teacher talk to them, alert the parents or something like that to ensure that we keep the children safe. So let's go back to our apps there, and I'll pop up threat prevention. So for threat prevention, again, I've got that turned on. It's really easy. You just install it, turn it on, it starts working. In this particular case, I've left it as block any traffic that is high risk. You can play around with this a little bit. There's suspicious there. I tend to leave it as high risk, and that works pretty well to me. And I do see it blocking plenty of stuff, so it's definitely doing its job there. For threat prevention, there's certain things like proxy avoidance and things like that. You can add past sites into it. If even if something's been categorized one way, you want to pass it anyway, you can do that. You can set up various different types of rules there. And we also have the ability to enter a URL here and take a look at it. And that'll give you all the information you may want to know about a different website so that you can get some more information about it. So that's threat prevention. And now I think let's just create a rule. And I'm going to go to application control. So application control has lots of different applications here that you may want to put some limits on it. So for example, we can see Skype here. We could put some controls on Zoom meeting, for example, here. And here we're going to add a rule. And this rule I'm going to take as an example to block Discord, which is a very popular teenage chat application. So in this case, what I'm going to do is I'm going to use application control, and I'm going to look for application controls, an application name. And for Discord, I happen to know that we block it using this. It's always good to look at NG Firewall's session table if you're not sure what the application name is, and you can usually find it from there. So in this case, for this particular policy, and this can be time of day, so don't use Discord when you're meant to be doing your homework. Focus on what you're meant to be doing. So we can block Discord at this point, and then we can open it up once the homework period is done. So that will block Discord, and when one of the students tries to use Discord, they'll see it loading and it will stop, and they won't actually be able to use it. So I'm going to flip back to my slides. There we go. And so some of the things that we didn't look at, all the different types of things that you may want to do to protect the student network. So there's things that protect the network. So the firewall, you know, who can access on what ports, who's allowed to do what there, your general firewall rules. There's the layered protection of the virus blocker, threat prevention, phish blocker, and things like that. On the filtering side, there's web filter, there's SSL inspector. SSL inspector helps with web filter and application control because it will decrypt encrypted traffic so that you can get more granular on that and see individual URLs even when it's encrypted. And more of the internet is encrypted at the moment. So when thinking about web filter, it can be quite effective without that. But if you want to get absolutely into the fine details there for all traffic, using it with SSL inspector opens up a little bit more functionality there. Various things for performance. So you can put some bandwidth control, QoS policies on there. There's the ability to do WAN balancing and WAN failover, and web cache to speed up web browsing as well. I did show you that I'd put all students who were in grades 5 through 8 into a particular group. You can hook up NG Firewall with directory connector to use groups that are already set up there. And we took a look at policies and reports. Now, with regards to connectivity, specifically around kids working remotely and joining classes from home, there is the ability to set up various different types of VPN connections. So IPsec is particularly good and very nicely interoperable with all sorts of other security gateways. OpenVPN is very common as well. And at Untangle, we include WireGuard VPN as well, which is a very fast, secure connection that we've had a lot of success with, specifically around 2020 when people were looking for VPN technologies that were really simple to use, just worked, and when a student turned them on, they would forget about them. So they wouldn't even think about turning them off. If something felt slow, they stopped blaming their VPN connection and just left it running because it works really well. So I think that takes us to the end of the presentation. So Sherilyn, do we have any questions?
Yes, we definitely have a few. Let's just start right at the top. What's the difference between web monitor and web filter, and do I need both?
Yeah, so web monitor will look at web traffic and it will categorize it to give you visibility about what's going on the network. So really good if you want to get an idea of who's doing what on the network. Now, web filter goes one level further than that. And it will let you control the web traffic. So it will block web pages that aren't appropriate or that shouldn't be used at certain times of day. And if you have web filter, it includes web monitor. So you can either use just web monitor or web filter that includes both functionalities.
All right. The next two are, or the next one is about SSL certificates. How do I get SSL certificates to my student devices so that the web filter features that you talked about will work for encrypted websites?
Yes, SSL inspection is really useful for encrypted traffic. There are certain things you can do without it, but certain things, like when I demoed the search term for bullying before, you do need SSL inspector in order to use that. You can download the SSL certificate from NG Firewall, and then you can distribute that to various devices. So if there are school iPads, for example, it would definitely be better to have those set up before giving the devices to the kids. If kids are connecting on their own devices, then we have some instructions to follow for iPads and Macs and Windows machines in our knowledge base articles that you can find at support.untangle.com, which is listed on the page there.
All right. The next one is, can threat prevention protect my internet servers as well as act upon user machines that are browsing the web?
Yeah, that's a good question, because it does things in two directions. So in the case of an internet server, I'm presuming you mean something like having your own email server or a phone system. So in this case, as a connection comes in to try and connect to an email server or a phone system, threat prevention would assess the validity of the IP address trying to make that connection. So if it's trusted, it will then be allowed to make the connection to that internal server. If it's flagged as high risk, it will then be denied. Now, the other case, though, as well as protecting internal servers, is the case where a student or a teacher may be browsing the web. As they enter their URL, if they're trying to connect to something, the outbound IP address is assessed through threat prevention. And then again, if the IP address that they're trying to connect to is trustworthy, then the user will get their web page returned. If it's untrustworthy, then it will be blocked, and the end user doesn't get to see that web page at all because it's not trusted.
All right. And the last question, students are always installing new apps and going to different websites, some of which may be new. How does NG Firewall ensure that it knows about all the apps kids might be using?
Well, Untangle, as I mentioned, we use WebRoot's web filtering technology, which is updated every single day as new websites are added. So that's web filter. For application control, we use Procera or Sandvine for that. So as new websites are added, they get into WebRoot very quickly, and we pick them up right away, in fact. We access WebRoot's technology through the cloud, which is always up to date and has the latest information at all times. So we get the new categorizations that go straight to all NG Firewall appliances as quickly as they add them. And for application control, whenever there are new applications that are added to Sandvine or Procera, we add that into our latest build and ensure we have the latest applications there too.
All right, one more question just came in. How can I prevent students from using third-party VPNs to bypass Untangle?
How can I prevent students from using third-party VPNs to access Untangle? Well, you can search for the VPN. What I would do there is I would go into Session Manager and take a look at what's happening when they're using different types of VPN technologies, and then look for that with the session. And then you can set up a rule to look for that and then block it. So that's what I would do for that.
All right. Well, I think that wraps up everything. Heather, did you have any last thoughts before we sign off?
No, that's all from me.
On the screen right now, we have how you can connect with us, sales@untangle.com and support@untangle.com. And at our website, untangle.com, we have lots of resources for education that you can find there. And then I just want to thank everybody for joining us today. Thank you for the presentation, Heather, and go out and enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you.